tolerance and courtesy while working in the best interests of our community. If I can welcome governing body members and members of the public and council officers. First of all, we come to apologies. I have apologies from Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore on council business and from Councillor Kathy Casey, who's absent at a funeral this morning. Are there any other apologies? Sorry, Councillor Watson for lateness? Right. So I'll move that we accept those apologies. I have a seconder from Councillor Collins. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. 3, declaration of interest. Are there any members of the governing body that have any interest that they need to declare that will be affected by today's proceedings? If not, we come to confirmation of minutes. We have one set of minutes to confirm, the minutes of the 28th of February 2019. I'll move that they be confirmed. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Simpson. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Petitions, there are no petitions. Public input, there have been no requests for public input. Just before I come to local board input, can I foreshadow, given that this is the first meeting of the governing body since the tragic events caused by the terrorist attack in Christchurch, that I will be moving under extraordinary business to accept an item to discuss Christchurch and to move certain resolutions arising out of that. And with, I think, the concurrence of everybody, that should be earlier on our agenda rather than later on the agenda. It should not be left to item 16. So I'm suggesting that we discuss that and councillors will have the opportunity to have their say on that immediately after the local board input. I don't think it needs requiring, but thank you for your support, councillor, on that. So we come to local board input, and I'd like to invite local board members Troy Churton and David Wong to the table to talk about pre-application documentation being available to local board members. Troy and David, welcome. I think you're both aware of how we do this, so if you can give us an outline of the concerns that you wish to raise in about 5 minutes, and then there'll be opportunities for governing body members to raise questions. Yeah. I may, at the end of your exposition, just ask our council officers to bring a commentary in, because it's a reasonably technical matter, and I think that might be helpful both to you and to us. Troy and Tony, welcome. Troy, you're leading.
Thanks, Mayor Goff and fellow elected reps. Just to clarify, what we're doing here today is seeking your endorsement for elected representatives to be able to request and receive, as of right, access to pre-lodgement information, minutes, etc., made by council members of staff. So David's going to take you through the first part of the memo, and I'll take you through the second part. It should take no more than 5 minutes at the top.
Thank you to the governing body for the opportunity to present our case. The Auckland region, and also notably the Ōrākei ward, has been undergoing significant development and infrastructure changes. These changes impact our macroeconomic framework and suburban infrastructure and landscape. From a governance and oversight perspective, it is important that any elected representative, local board or governing body, can perform their duties and effectively and efficiently assess all information on developments proposed by applicants. This includes, when entering the consent phase, the board is abreast of key information to support its view in a balanced and transparent manner. The request for pre-application minutes and documentation is not extraordinary. The information may or may not be confidential, but if council planners have had these preliminary discussions with the applicant, then the local board should not be removed from access to minutes from this exchange. The principal request for information originated in July 2018, nearly 9 months ago. We have pivoted from one council planning contact to the next to achieve an outcome. This is not the first request for such information. Many ratepayers, resident and business associations, and other interested parties raise the awareness of developments as they become more familiar with the unitary plan and seek answers to impacts on their neighbourhoods even before formal applications are filed, and of course once they are filed. Many developers also hold pre-lodgement engagement meetings with some of these residents and groups. As elected members, we are representatives of these stakeholders. Having access to pre-lodgement exchanges keeps us abreast of potential development and abreast of how council may interpret the unitary plan.
So just, David and I are referring to a memo which hopefully has been circulated around. We're up to number 8 of that memo, which talks about how we're seeking consistency and transparency with access to pre-lodgement application material. And in point 9, thanking the Acting Director of Regulatory Services for a response, which is the very, very last attachment on your hard copy bundle in your agenda, the copy of that letter which was sent to us back in December or January. And in that letter, the Director states, quoted, "Under the need-to-know principle, elected members should have access to information held by council where it's reasonably necessary to enable that member to properly perform their particular statutory duties." The Director also in that letter, under the heading Ōrākei Local Board Access to Pre-Application Material, says that pre-lodgement exchanges are not part of the formal regulatory decision-making function for council's delegated planners under the RMA process. And that's quite important in relation to what we're saying, because taking that position, recognising that pre-lodgement is not actually part of the regulatory decision-making phase, puts a unique slant on our access to pre-lodgement application information. It's inappropriate, in our view, that any elected representative, you guys or us as local board members, when we are asking to see pre-lodgement application material that the council itself may have generated, such as a minute or something of that nature, has that request for information determined on a need-to-know basis by some planner manager with delegated authority for decision-making under a regulatory process which actually hasn't yet started. It's an incorrect legal position that's been taken here. The correct pathway, and this is very strongly submitted by us, is that if you or us requested pre-lodgement information material, then our inherent duty of care and our code of conduct requirement to understand what information is confidential or not, what information is sensitive or not, what information is council internal or not, kicks in. And that is the appropriate way to determine access to information, not by way of a gatekeeping needs-to-know basis administered by a planning manager. Our statutory duties, point 13, cover compliance and alignment to obligations, and in one of the executive's letter, paragraph of his letter, he says that an applicant may have an expectation that information would not be public, and that's fair enough, some of them do. Some developers get quite sensitive about their pre-lodgement meetings and that sort of thing. The elected representative's duty of care and code of conduct requirements are such that a competent elected representative must know that and must only expect to have access to information with that in mind. Let's not presume the lowest common denominator in terms of the ability of elected reps to understand that getting free, unfettered access to pre-lodgement application comes with overriding duties of care and confidence to council, because we are part of council, lest we forget. The local board members are not the public. The local board members are elected members of Auckland Council. So over the page in 15, just to wrap up, like I started, what we are asking this governing body to do is to formally recognise that you, as governing body members, and ourselves as local board members, may, on request, and that's important too. We're certainly not saying that every elected rep must now, as an extra administrative layer, always have access to every pre-lodgement minute or meeting or note or whatever. It's on an on-request basis. But the request should not be denied by a needs-to-know approach. And that we will receive that pre-lodgement information regardless of whether an applicant has sought confidentiality or not, because the confidentiality, if they've sought it, would be between council and the applicant, and the elected rep would be expected in getting access to that info to uphold that confidentiality, unless there were very good reasons not to, and that would surely be discussed by an elected rep with the appropriate planning manager. But I can't think of a case where an elected rep would want to breach that, given the code that we all adhere to. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Troy and David. Look, I absolutely respect the way in which you've made this submission and the genuineness of your concern. It is a matter that I had to seek advice on because I wasn't aware of the background and the technicalities around it. So with your indulgence, I'd like to ask James Hessel and Ian Smallburn just to come share the table with you at the front, just so that you can hear a direct response from them as well as the formal response you've had, and then we'll go to questions from councillors. So once again, James and Ian, if I can ask you to keep your comments succinct, and then we'll come to questions.
Thank you, Mayor Phil. I think it's important to remember what we're talking about here. Pre-application meetings and the minutes and material that go with them are a mechanism that we use in the Resource Consents Department to encourage applicants to come in prior to lodging their applications so that they can have a free and frank discussion about what they're intending to do. It is only their intentions at this point in time. They speak with our staff, they might speak with some of the experts that we have in the department as well to bounce ideas around and to work out whether or not what they're proposing is going to fly in a consenting process. Their intentions often change as a result of that, or the shape of whatever it is that they're proposing changes after our discussion. Sometimes, of course, we have to say, well, actually, what you're proposing isn't even going to fly, so that they don't even proceed with that. They come to us with that expectation that they can talk in a free and frank manner, that there will be some confidentiality. That's not to say that there's always that level of confidentiality. In one particular instance related to the Ōrākei local board, we asked the applicants whether they're happy to have the information disclosed to the local board, and they were fine with that. In another case, that they weren't for reasonable commercial sensitivity reasons. We're also in a challenging position in that we're trying to push through as many consents as possible, as quickly as possible. The pre-application meeting process enables a lot of issues to be sorted out prior to us entering into the statutory timeframes that we need to meet. So it's a win-win for council and the applicant if we can get this done as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Thank you very much. Let's go to questions from members of the governing body. Councillor Wayne Walker first, and then Councillor Simpson.
Just in terms of the procedure here, given that we've had somebody as an officer speaking and Troy, is it appropriate for me to ask questions of both, or should I confine myself to the local board? Yeah,
I'm reasonably relaxed. I think we should focus on the local board members because we'll have further access to our officials. But if there's something important you want to ask the officials, I'm happy to go along with that, Councillor.
Okay. So just in terms of context, I just wonder if you're familiar, for example, with the protocols we've got that we're developing with CCOs that go to the exchange of information with local boards.
Troy, could I get you just to put the mic on, please?
Not intimately familiar.
Okay, and the other question I've got, have you sought any advice from the Ombudsman or the like around this issue?
We're hoping not to have to go that far.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay, that's right. Thank you.
Perhaps I can just help a little with that latter question. I understand that there is an old Lagoima case before the Ombudsman at the moment that relates to this, and if the Ombudsman makes a ruling, then clearly we would need to ensure our practices and our processes are aligned with that. I'm not quite sure when we might expect that ruling from the Ombudsman. I don't know whether our local board members are familiar with that. It's a case involving, I think, the North Shore from some years back. Councillor Desley Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to the local board for bringing this to the governing body's attention. It's a really quite tricky one because this is we can't make any decisions here. This is just about questions and listening to the local board. So to that end, I'll couch my question very carefully, maybe to Ian Smallburn, if I may, and to the local board, the same question. And that is, I have had a follow-up meeting on behalf of the local board with Ian Smallburn as a request from the local board through me about this issue. And my question to Ian and to the local board, are you happy for that meetings to continue? Because what I believe that staff are trying to do is traverse both the legal and the need of the local board, traverse that very delicate pathway between the two. And I just think it needs a bit of further discussion. We can't resolve right now because it's public forum, but I think what potentially we need to do is have further discussion with the local board and with Ian and try and come up with a solution and then maybe present it back. Is that acceptable to you, Mr. Smallburn?
Yeah.
And local board, is that acceptable to you?
I'd be more than happy to continue those conversations. I recognise that there are pros and cons and possibly some form of middle ground could be formed regarding information, but at the same time not creating inefficiencies and not losing confidence in the pre-application process. So I'm more than happy to continue those conversations, yeah.
Right.
Thank you. Troy, were you wanting to comment on that? Or?
Yeah, look, we are more than happy with Desley continuing on with Ian, that's for sure. And yeah, no.
Okay, that's good. Councillor Cooper.
Can we turn some of these off? Because it's thank you.
Oh, sorry, if the public's not using their mic, can turn them off.
Churton, I'm just trying to understand, given that neither the local boards or the councillors get to make decisions on resource consents, I'm just wondering what the need for that early information is, given that, as Mr. Hassel said, often doesn't even happen. I just want to understand why, given that you, at the time of the application being made public, and even before that, you'll often get a notification decision you need to input into, that sort of stuff. I want to understand what is the need for that information, because you do get all the information and then you do have the opportunity to submit. That's the choice. You can, the work that we've done in a former working party around this, and you have all the information. So to express the views of the public, okay? So that's your role. What is the purpose of you wanting all of that sort of early information that may not have been developed yet? I'm just trying to understand it.
So, thanks. It's a really good question, Councillor. And the reality is that only a very few number of applications come to local boards for comment. There are certain triggers, and the list of triggers that require planners to send files to us for comment are refined, and the percentage of those applications that we get, which we comment on in which our comments make any form of difference as to notification is also slimmer because of changes to the RMA, which have taken away a lot of notification rights for the community. So one of the key purposes of having access to information, both pre-decision-making process, which is the pre-lodgement stage, and the opportunity once the decision-making process is formally in place, is enabling an elected rep to keep a monitoring eye that both the processes of the RMA and the development of what's happening under the unitary plan is happening according to the policies of the unitary plan. And retaining an elected rep's right to have access to information fulfills that. It's a really important distinction to make, Linda, Councillor Linda, the time the file becomes public is when it's actually lodged formally, right? And even then, the ability of the community to have input on that is incredibly slender. The only opportunities for anybody with any interest really is down to the elected reps. And it was interesting that my friend Mr. Hassell's comments were indicative of the key things that elected reps like us at this table need to make sure we retain access to info on. Mr. Hassell said, pre-lodgement applications are about encouraging free discussions between applicants and developers and so forth in council. Agreed. No doubt about that whatsoever. He also said, pre-lodgement applications enable a lot of issues to be sorted out prior to the decision process. And that's where it becomes a little bit contentious, folks, because council's legal advice seems to be that the pre-lodgement process is actually a way of facilitating a fast tracking of the decision-making process, and some decision-making types of inquiry are made during the pre-lodgement process.
Our staff, that there's
somehow
are out of order.
I think the local board member has finished in the reply. Can I call Councillor Pennyholtz for the last question?
Thank you. So I'm
Did
now
he
a
finish?
little bit.
So sorry, I presume
I've finished, yeah.
Yeah, I presumed you'd finished. Thank you.
Okay. I'm just a little bit unclear given the last bit of the conversation. So this is a question of clarification. The pre-lodgement discussions that are talked about, my understanding as an elected representative, I've been a hearings commissioner and a councillor for a very, very long time. That's a critical discussion between the developer, our staff, our legal advisors.
Mm-hmm.
There's no room for politics in that, nor is there any room for members of the public. That needs to be in a trusting and confidential basis. So I'll go through. So I think we're agreed with that.
Mm-hmm.
Is what you're asking for post-lodgement the ability to go back and have a look at what some of those notes might have covered? Because I'm not too clear when you see yourself in the process. That's my first question.
Most of the time that we get a heads up is once the application has already been lodged through the weekly notification list, right? That's really, unless we were formally part of a pre-decision-making process, and planners had to formally notify us of every pre-lodgement meeting they were having, which God knows we wouldn't want, then you're right. It's access to information about pre-lodgement conversations or minutes after the fact, most of the time. Right? Sometimes there seem to be some applications which get lodged and then put on hold for one reason or another and then changed. There's variability, as you would know. But it's usually us seeking access to pre-lodgement minutes from a list of applications that have since been filed.
So I think the question I really want to ask Mr. Mayor, is as part of any agreement that would be formed between local boards and our staff about access to information, would the local boards be prepared to have a corresponding level of agreement around confidentiality and respect for the legal process, because we are engaged in what I could only call a complete schmozzle with the current application in Oraki for a plan change, and we're now possibly going to end up in court with that. Because I think unless the boards are prepared to sign up to a very clear code of conduct around this information, we need to safeguard our legal spend, our legal rights, and we also need to safeguard the ability for our developers to have a clear, uninterrupted and unfettered process without politics interfering. So would there be an agreement to sign up to a code of conduct around this with local boards?
So my answer to that, Councillor Penny, Mr Chair, would be that firstly, the Oraki Point plan change doesn't involve the same principles that we're discussing today. Secondly, that the elected reps, all of us, are already subject to codes of conduct which are very clear about our duties, and I don't think that would be needed. Any extra agreement layer would be necessary because what's there is perfectly good and in place.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Daniel Newman.
Just wondering if I've interpreted this correctly, because the activities of local government are subject to discovery through the Local Government Official Information Meetings Act. Any person can apply for information under the Lagoima, but it is not, the presumption of the Act does not necessarily oblige that elected members will receive information. They can apply for information. There's no guarantee that they should receive information, particularly if it relates to a private individual and a private individual's transactions. So what is it that you are needing? Because you're not entitled to know what a constituent in Oraki has applied for necessarily, just because of your office. You're entitled to apply for it, but the information is only provided on the basis of the principle of availability unless there is a reason to withhold.
Do you want to comment on that? You're right that anybody could seek a Lagoima request and the principle of availability applies. What we're saying is that it would be to take Councillor Penny's point, it would be an unnecessary use of time, money, resource, etc. if a local board member needed to exercise a Lagoima request every time it were requested to see pre-lodgement minutes for a particular application once that application had been filed. And that the status of an elected rep as part of council in having access to that information should be treated openly as if there should be no fetters on that access, so long as the elected rep getting access to that information understands the thing that I responded to Penny's question, that there is a duty of confidentiality with it.
For me, the provision in the Act that gives you that privilege. You can't.
I don't have the Act in front of me, but I don't think that's necessary.
Well, the answer is that it doesn't exist. You can apply, but your role doesn't entitle you to information just because of your role. Your role entitles you, as an actual person, you're entitled to apply for the information. But there may be reasons why the applicant doesn't want you to have the information, frankly. And that's actually covered under the Act because there are privacy considerations under the Privacy Act, but under under Lagoima. I think you're asking for something that you're not legally entitled to.
Well, we'll probably have to disagree on that, but
Okay. Right, I think I'm going to terminate. We've reached the half hour set aside for this. I think we've had a good exchange of views, and I hope that you found that helpful, and there will be ongoing discussions around it. There are conflicting principles here, and there may be some ways around it, and obviously council officers treat this on a case-by-case basis because in some cases pre-application information is available to the board. In other cases, there's commercial confidentiality. So, Councillor Simpson, can I ask you to move the motion of thanks, please? And we have a seconder for that, Councillor Fletcher.
Good. Thanks for your time, folks.
Sorry, we'll just move the. Oh, it's been moved. Sorry, yeah. I'll take it as read. It's on the board that the Councillor Simpson has moved that we thank you for your attendance. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried. Thank you very much, and thank you to officers as well.